On June 14, 2025, Minnesota was rocked by a day of violence that would leave an indelible mark on the state's history. What began as an ordinary summer morning quickly spiraled into chaos as news of a shocking attack spread rapidly across communities, igniting fear and disbelief. Residents across Minnesota watched in horror as headlines flashed across their screens, reporting a series of coordinated attacks that left the state in shock and disbelief. Two respected lawmakers, House Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and State Senator John Hoffman, were targeted in their own homes, places that should have been sanctuaries, now transformed into crime scenes. Melissa and her husband, Mark Hortman, tragically lost their lives in the attack. John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, were gravely injured but managed to survive, their lives forever changed by the violence that shattered their sense of security. These were not random acts of violence, but calculated, politically motivated attacks that struck at the very heart of Minnesota's leadership, sending shockwaves through the halls of government and the wider community. The violence at two separate homes triggered one of the largest and most urgent manhunts in state history, as law enforcement agencies from across Minnesota mobilized to track down the perpetrator. Investigators worked tirelessly, quickly connecting the attacks and piecing together evidence that pointed to a single suspect with a clear and chilling agenda. As the investigation unfolded, the community's sense of safety was shattered. Fear and grief swept through neighborhoods as families gathered to mourn and support one another in the face of unimaginable loss. The suspect, Vanceboelter, a 58-year-old from Green Isle, soon became the focus of a massive search effort, with authorities scouring rural areas and neighborhoods in hopes of bringing him to justice. The motive behind the attacks appeared rooted in deep political grievances, highlighting a disturbing and growing trend of violence against public officials, a threat that has become all too real in recent years. The events of June 14th served as a painful reminder of the deep divisions and rising tensions in American politics, exposing the vulnerability of those who serve and the communities they represent. In the aftermath, Minnesota was left to mourn its losses, to grapple with difficult questions, and to wonder how such a tragedy could happen in a place they once believed was safe. Vanceboelter was an unremarkable figure in Green Isle, Minnesota, a quiet, rural community where everyone seemed to know each other. For years, he blended into the background, just another face in the crowd, rarely drawing attention to himself. But everything changed on June 14th, when his name suddenly became known across the state and beyond. Behind closed doors, Boelter lived a very different life. He was a dedicated prepper, quietly stockpiling food, water, and emergency supplies in his basement. He spent countless hours preparing for what he believed were inevitable disasters, both natural and man-made. His obsession with readiness went far beyond what most would consider normal. When investigators searched his home, they were stunned to discover over 50 firearms and a massive tub of ammunition. The sheer scale of his arsenal revealed a man who was not just preparing for emergencies, but seemingly ready for armed conflict. Authorities described the collection as one of the largest they had ever seen in a private residence. The attacks on lawmakers that followed pointed to deep-seated anger and a growing sense of alienation. Boelter's actions suggested he believed violence could be used to achieve political goals, a mindset that alarmed both local officials and the wider community. Now, Boelter faces a long list of state and federal charges, including murder and attempted murder. Prosecutors have indicated that the severity of his crimes could lead to the death penalty, making his case one of the most high-profile in recent Minnesota history. But this case is about more than just one man's actions. It stands as a stark warning about how unchecked political grievance and personal isolation can spiral into extremist violence, threatening the very fabric of our society. The arsenal found in his home painted a chilling picture of his mindset, raising urgent questions about how such stockpiles can go unnoticed until it's too late. As the legal process unfolds, the public will be watching closely, eager to understand what drove Boelter to such extremes and what warning signs may have been missed along the way. Understanding how political disagreement and personal disillusionment can turn deadly is crucial if we hope to prevent future tragedies. Communities must grapple with the difficult questions raised by this case. The nation watches, hoping to learn from this tragedy and to heal together in the aftermath. In the hours after the shootings, Minnesota was gripped by fear and urgency. The search for Vanceboelter became the largest manhunt in state history, mobilizing every available law enforcement resource. Helicopters scanned rural landscapes, officers combed fields and outbuildings, and checkpoints dotted highways. Public alerts urged residents to stay vigilant and report anything suspicious. For over 40 tense hours, families lived in fear, their routines upended by the search. News updates tracked every development, amplifying the anxiety. The operation's scale reflected the gravity of the threat. Hundreds of officers worked around the clock, determined to restore safety. The community endured a collective ordeal, waiting for the manhunt's end. Relief would only come when the suspect was finally found. The manhunt ended near Boelter's home in Green Isle after 40 tense hours. Law enforcement, aided by public tips and aerial surveillance, closed in on his location. The final confrontation was tense, but ended without further violence. Boelter was taken into custody, ending the immediate threat to public safety. The state breathed a collective sigh of relief as news of his capture spread. With the suspect behind bars, focus shifted to building the legal case. The community could finally begin to process the trauma of the past days. Justice for the victims was now the priority. As the intense manhunt for Vanceboelter unfolded, Jenny Boelter, his wife, found herself at the center of a rapidly escalating situation. Her actions in those critical hours would soon draw the full attention of law enforcement and the public alike. Jenny made the decision to leave her home with her children, heading north in a hurry. She drove for miles, eventually meeting police at a gas station far from Green Isle, a location that seemed carefully chosen to avoid attention. When officers searched her vehicle, they discovered 2 firearms, several family passports, and $10,000 in cash. These items suggested not just a desire for safety, but the possibility of a well-prepared plan to flee the area entirely. During questioning, Jenny explained that her husband had warned her to leave, claiming he feared armed individuals might come to their house. She appeared anxious, her story raising as many questions as it answered. Jenny was cooperative with investigators, answering many of their questions. However, she was not entirely forthcoming, withholding certain details that could have been crucial. This lack of full transparency complicated the investigation and left detectives frustrated. She eventually revealed that she and Vance were dedicated preppers, always ready for emergencies. This, she said, explained the presence of weapons, cash, and passports, as well as their readiness to leave at a moment's notice. This detail about their lifestyle added a new layer of complexity to the case. Investigators now had to consider whether Jenny's actions were part of a survivalist routine or something more deliberate, raising difficult questions about her true intentions. While being a prepper isn't illegal, the context of the ongoing investigation made Jenny's preparedness seem suspicious. Authorities wondered if the supplies were meant for safety or for escape. Investigators scrutinized every aspect of Jenny's actions, trying to determine how much she knew about her husband's plans and whether she was actively helping him evade capture. Her role in the unfolding events would remain under close examination as law enforcement continued to piece together the truth. The search for answers now extended beyond Vance himself, to his family, whose every move was watched and analyzed for clues. Nearly 2 weeks after the shootings, Jenny Boelter broke her silence with a public statement. She condemned her husband's alleged actions as a betrayal of their Christian faith and values. Jenny expressed shock, heartbreak, and horror, insisting her family had no knowledge of Vance's plans. She made it clear that his violence did not reflect their beliefs. Her statement was a forceful rejection of political violence and an attempt to separate her family from Vance's actions. Jenny thanked law enforcement for their efforts and expressed sympathy for the victims. The statement was a plea for understanding and a step toward rebuilding her family's life. It was also a message to the community. They, too, were victims of Vance's choices. Jenny's words marked the beginning of a new chapter for her and her children. Jenny Boelter's cooperation with law enforcement became a focal point after her initial meeting at the gas station. She publicly affirmed her willingness to help investigators, distancing herself from her husband's alleged crimes. While not charged, her proximity to Vance and her actions after the shootings made her a key witness. Investigators pressed for details about Vance's mindset, their conversations, and the weapons in their home. Jenny's testimony was crucial for understanding the events leading up to the attacks. Her perspective as Vance's wife offered unique insight into his life and motivations. As the legal process continues, Jenny remains a significant figure, not as a defendant, but as a witness. Her cooperation is vital in the search for justice. The answers she provides will help fill in the gaps of a tragedy that shook a state. In September 2025, Jenny Boelter filed for divorce, seeking to separate her future from her husband's legacy of violence. The filing, involving their children, was a public declaration of her intent to move forward. Judge Amber Donnelly sealed all documents, protecting the family's privacy during this painful process. The decision allowed Jenny and her children to grieve and rebuild away from public scrutiny. Her actions reinforced her condemnation of Vance's crimes and her resolve to start anew. The divorce marked a necessary step in healing from trauma and betrayal. The Boelter family, too, became victims of political violence. The ripple effects of that day extended far beyond the immediate tragedy. The Minnesota shootings are part of a troubling rise in political violence across the U.S. Attacks on public officials and political figures have become alarmingly common, fueled by deep divisions and heated rhetoric. Just weeks before, right-wing activist Charlie Kirk was shot in Utah, drawing national condemnation. The Minnesota tragedy forced communities to confront the dangers of political extremism. Families of the victims now face long roads of grief and recovery, supported by a resilient community. Vigils and memorials honored the victims, while the legal process against Vance Boelter moved forward. Jenny Boelter's steps to rebuild her life underscored the far-reaching impact of violence. The event sparked urgent conversations about lowering the political temperature and protecting democracy. Healing will take time, but the community stands united in hope for peace and justice. The path forward is uncertain, but Minnesota and the nation must walk it together.